Before I introduce the authors, I'd like to first introduce Dr. Larry Summers, who will share some thoughts about superabundance. We've invited Professor Summers, not just because he's one of the most important economists in the world, but also because he can be counted on to provide critical comments, some of which we may not agree with, all of which will be useful to us in refining our own thinking on this big issue. Larry Summers is the President Emeritus of Harvard University, where he holds a professorship still. During the past several decades, he's served in a series of senior policy positions, including Vice President of Development Economics and Chief Economist at the World Bank, Director of the National Economic Council for the Obama administration, and Secretary of the Treasury of the United States from 1999 to 2001. I could go on, but we would rather hear directly from Professor Summers. Professor Summers, thank you for joining us by Zoom, and welcome back to the Cato Institute.
I'm glad to be with you. I wish you had gone on. I was rather enjoying all the nice things that you were saying about me, and I was remembering what Lyndon Johnson had said when he was introduced in a similar way. I wish my parents had been here for that. My father would have appreciated what you said, and my mother would have believed it. I'm flattered and honored by the invitation to participate in this book. I think that Pooley and Tupy have written a very, very important book. It is important, I think, in three respects. First, it adds to the growing body of evidence and knowledge that we have, documenting that with all the problems, with all the travails, with all that we worry about, humanity does make staggering and immense progress. I remark often to students that, all things considered, I would probably rather have the life and the opportunities of a lower income student in the United States in material terms than the life of John D. Rockefeller. The chance of suffering a fatal illness at a young age would be much lower. The range of foods that would be open would be much larger. The extent of the entertainment options available would be much greater. The comfort of being able to live in a room whose temperature was adjusted to suit would be vastly better for that student. The ability to get to a place 3 or 5 or 6 or 10,000 miles away quickly would be immensely larger. The number of things about which that person could learn would be far greater. The freshness, the range of foods that would be available to eat would be substantially more, and the comfort of the available clothing would be substantially greater. And so I think it is immensely important to recognize the kind of progress. And while this is a point that has been made by a number of others, I have rarely, if ever, seen it made as extensively and as thoughtfully and in as many spheres as it is made in this important volume. Second thing that I think is very, very important is the notion of time cost that this book passes. There's something slightly odd about using the notion of time cost in a Cato Institute publication, since after all, it was Karl Marx who put forward a labor theory of value and sought to explain the value of all things based on the extent of labor input that went into them. But I think it is a very powerful way of capturing the kind of progress that we have all observed. The truth is that an hour of labor translates into far more in the way of goods that provide necessities for satisfaction, services that provide utility, than has been the case at any point in human history. One doesn't have to believe in GDP figures. One doesn't have to believe in markets. One doesn't have to believe very much in anything in economic science to see what has happened to the time cost of an immense array of goods and services. And that is documented in a very clear way here. And I think it is an important contribution. And I hope that there will be continuing efforts of some kind to construct ongoing time series on a range of time costs for different goods at different times in different places, so that one can continue to monitor this extraordinary progress. I think the third thing that is important about this book is the celebration of what are, in some sense, the greatest forces that have pushed human well-being forward. Combination of technological and scientific inquiry and the decentralization and economies on information made possible by markets. It's an extraordinary truth that I always stress in teaching students economics, that there's not a single person anywhere on the planet who, in an entirely self-sufficient way, from their own knowledge, would create a ballpoint pen. The ink, the liner, the tip, the packaging, the everything, with all the inputs to those things. And yet, we go into stores without the slightest hesitation or doubt that we will be able to obtain a ballpoint pen and obtain a ballpoint pen at negligible cost in terms of our effort. That idea that things can happen and progress can be made without central direction and without central plan is a crucial lesson. It is perhaps the most important lesson in a different way from evolutionary biology. And it is the most important lesson that comes out of a contemplation of the market economy. Design without overarching designers can achieve extraordinary things. That is not, to me, a case for libertarian viewpoints on all questions, but it is a tribute to what we now understand about the human endeavor. The other book that was published beside this one in the last month that made a huge impression on me was my student Brad DeLong's work, Slouching Towards Utopia, that highlights the dramatic turn that humanity took in 1870 when progress clearly was established in a way that overturned the Malthusian devil. That is something that is profoundly important, and is profoundly important to recognize whenever it is contemplated that something needs to be directed or to be planned. Now, if I have a difference with our authors, it is not in their optimism. It is not in their overall vision. It is not in their rejection of Malthusian ideas, but it is in their libertarian bias. To say that markets and science produce tremendous, incredible outcomes is not to say that those outcomes cannot be made better through collective and planned action. And the great questions of our time, in many ways, involve what those actions should be, how they should be designed, what the role of incentives should be versus the role of coordination and planning. As an economist, I share the author's bias for decentralization, but I think it is very important to consider each of these issues on a case-by-case basis. But we will all engage in that consideration much more wisely for the extraordinary collection of data and the extraordinarily powerful arguments presented in this important volume. I am honored to have been asked to give these opening remarks, and I commend this important work to all who wish to understand the human condition and the prospects for its improvement. Thank you very much.